Welcome, everyone. My name is Danae Smith, and I am delighted that you could join us for this webinar that is being hosted by the Development Cooperation Department of MEDREC as part of its Stabilization Mechanism project. We look forward to hearing insights from the European Peacebuilding Liaison Office, Global Water Partnerships, and Adelphi on approaches to capacity building and environmental peacebuilding programming today. Before we get started, I'd like to direct your attention to a few housekeeping rules that have just been added to the chat box. We kindly ask that you observe these rules to ensure that we have a productive exchange today. We anticipate that today's webinar will take around 1 hour and a half, with the last half an hour spent on discussion and Q&A. If you do have a question, please use the Q&A chat box function and indicate if you would like to direct your question to a specific speaker. We will share the webinar recording directly with attendees, and it will also be made available online. I'd like to now hand over to our Center Director, Kieran Oakwin, to say a few words.
Well, thank you very much, Danny, and welcome, colleagues. First of all, we're really honoured to be joined by colleagues from the European Peacebuilding Liaison Office, Global Water Partnership, and Adelphi. MEDREC is a learning organisation. We're one of those organisations that are always trying to make things a little bit better, and we always know our own processes and our own approaches need improvement. And this is particularly strong for us in the area of capacity building and environmental peace building, which is our core building. By means of background, we're a multilateral international organisation headquartered in Muscat in Oman. We're the only surviving part of the Madrid process. So before Oslo, there was a peace process, and MEDREC was an initiative that came out of that peace process to use water for peace. Our mandates are to support the Middle East peace process, and secondly, to be a model organisation for states that seek to use transboundary environmental issues in the service of a peace process. So we are at our core conflict resolution organisation. Originally, the focus was desalination, then water, and now it's all transboundary environmental issues, including climate, as an entry point into a peace process. So how to get capacity building right is really, really important to us, because if you make a mistake, it can go very, very wrong. And just briefly in 20 seconds to explain our approach at the moment. The main learning we have had from 20 years of doing this is that ignoring politics is political. Any process that ignores politics, that's a political stance itself. It accepts an existing status quo. It accepts an existing power dynamic, and that's a very damaging thing, which we can't do. We have two approaches to capacity building. We have a trilateral capacity building, which is between the core parties of the Middle East peace process, based on a multilateral joint gap analysis of environmental issues, and 5 or 6 times a year then senior civil servants meeting to discuss those issues. We then have a bilateral capacity building program with countries that are OECD DACable, and the idea of this is to address negotiation disparities into certain technical areas, and also human development gaps and human development issues that in water and environment that need to be improved. So we don't engage in training one conflict party to another, and we feel that could be quite damaging. It can embed inequalities and things like that. So it's a very difficult area. And it's an area we're really, really looking forward to learning from today. So can I just conclude just by thanking our colleagues for being here, for thanking Danny and Esme for putting all this together. And I look forward to a productive afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Kieran. Now I'd like to welcome Lorenzo Angelini from the European Peacebuilding Liaison Office to provide an overview on interlinkages between climate change and peacebuilding, and share insights on approaches to building capacities from the perspective of APLO's member organizations. Over to you, Lorenzo.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the introduction. I'm going to quickly share my screen. There we go. Can you see it properly? Yes, it should be working. Perfect. Great. So thanks again. I'm Lorenzo Angelini. As was mentioned, I work as Senior Policy Officer for EPLO. I coordinate our work on peacebuilding and the climate crisis. So the European Peacebuilding Liaison Office, EPLO, is the independent civil society platform of European NGOs, networks of NGOs and think tanks, all committed to peacebuilding and the prevention of violent conflict. So we have a mandate to influence the European Union to make it more active and effective in contributing to peace, and pursuing non-violent forms of conflict resolution. So we have 47 member organizations currently. They work all over the world. Many of them are working on the interlinkages between climate change, peace, and conflict that we'll be discussing today. And they come at it through different angles. As you can see from this slide, they focus on natural resource management, environmental peace building, some focus on climate sensitive mediation, water security, and the list goes on as you can see. Some of our members are multi-mandate organizations. So they have peace building activities, development activities, humanitarian assistance related activities. It can vary quite a bit. Others have more of a focus on peace building itself. But very much in touch with other organizations, for example, in the environmental protection and climate adaptation sectors. So as a quick disclaimer, the EPLO Secretariat that I'm a part of does not implement projects in fragile and conflict-affected countries. So I'm not an expert on the implementation of capacity building programs. However, the points I'll cover, come from the work of our members, and hopefully they will serve as an introduction for the more concrete examples provided by my co-panelists. So I won't spend too much time on the next two slides. I imagine that most people in the audience are quite familiar with the interlinkages between the climate crisis and peace and conflict that we're discussing today. So as you well know, the research available on the intersection between the two, shows that the linkages are complex. They're very much context specific. There's no systematic causal link between climate change and conflict, but they can interplay in very different ways. Climate change can contribute to fueling violence by intersecting with various drivers of conflict. In relation to natural resource availability, impacting the livelihoods and mobility of population groups, increasing the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, which can result in grievances when authorities do not prevent, mitigate, and respond to these events adequately. And obviously, it's important to note that the resilience of groups and individuals to the effects of climate change and conflict can vary by gender, ethnicity, age, religion or lack thereof, class, disability, sexual orientation, education, etc., etc. And these identities intersect. So at EPLO, we pay a particular, we put a particular emphasis on paying attention to how those dynamics are gendered. So this is apparent in different ways. For example, access to and the use of natural resources, is often profoundly gendered. Women and men can be affected differently in herder communities, for example, particularly those that move across borders. Governance structures that exclude and marginalize women and minority groups can make them more vulnerable to the effects of extreme weather events, such as floods and droughts. The list goes on. It's also important when thinking about the interplay between climate change and conflict, obviously, to pay attention to how the effects of climate change can be conducive to peace and gender equality in different ways. And in relation to this, I'll move immediately to the next slide about climate actions and how they may themselves exacerbate conflict or be conducive to peace. So as you know, again, those linkages are extremely complex in the same way that those between climate change and peace and conflict were complex. When climate actions fail to address systemic inequalities and power relations, they can entrench existing social hierarchies. When security forces are used to protect the environment, including, for example, in forest services, this can, in some cases, lead to abuses against civilian populations, particularly when local communities whose livelihoods depend on the resources are not involved and consulted as part of efforts to protect the environment. It can also be the case that control over the funding and the implementation of activities leads to power struggles between authorities and sometimes also between local leaders. So that can be another obstacle. On the opposite side of the spectrum, when they are sensitive to power relations, gender dynamics, diverse human security needs, obviously climate actions can be conducive to peace. So projects bringing together different actors and communities, empowering them to implement collective activities, can strengthen social cohesion and have a positive effect also on governance and how inclusive governance can be. So environmental peace building in this case has really a key role to play here. Efforts relating to livelihood diversification can provide opportunities for marginalized groups that they did not have with the previous status quo. Climate adaptation efforts also can lead to strengthening early warning systems, combining analysis processes that involve meteorological and climatic data with climate-related data can, produce results that allow for better prevention and anticipation of risks. So one example that really came up in a recent discussion that Apple organized relates to the implications of energy regeneration through hydropower, particularly along borders, and the impact that this may have on transboundary peace and conflict dynamics. So hydropower can contribute to reducing or increasing water availability in given areas, including across a border. And the energy generated through it can be distributed in ways that may benefit groups and countries either evenly or unevenly. So it can have both types of effects. So this brings me to our discussion on capacity building. So the complexity of the linkages that we covered means that in order to reach a robust understanding of the dynamics at play in a given area and to be conflict sensitive, and this goes for transboundary dynamics in particular, it's necessary to avoid assumptions about the effects of climate change and of climate actions. And this complexity means that it's essential to carry out nuanced and context-specific analysis of those linkages. So I won't go into too much detail on what conflict analysis is. I'm happy to go back to that in the discussion if that's of interest. I just want to highlight that it's extremely important to pay particular attention again to gender and to dynamics of inclusion and exclusion in analysis. Analyzing the diverse roles that men and women can play in conflict dynamics, the way they experience it, how gender norms and structural gendered marginalization can interact with other dynamics, and again, how the interplay itself of climate change and conflict may contribute to shaping gender norms. In terms of building capacities, what does this mean? It means that it's crucial for civil society organizations, but also other types of actors that engage in environmental peace building and other types of interventions around it. It's crucial to ensure that their staff involved in conflict analysis processes not only have the adequate time and resources to carry out the analysis, but also that they have the relevant expertise on conflict prevention and conflict analysis, on gender equality, on climate change and the environment. It also means that it's important to strengthen their ability to carry out participatory analysis, because conflict analysis should be informed by input from local populations and local civil society actors, affected groups. And this requires capacities and expertise in itself to ensure that consultations are conflict sensitive. It also involves supporting partners with access to different types of data, conflict and peace related data, but also as I mentioned, climate related data, scientific data around the environment, water, ecosystems, etc. But also with the tools to use the data in an integrated manner. It can be obviously extremely difficult to combine different types of data and to have a holistic approach to the tools that should be used. Then the staff involved in the analysis itself obviously should not only have the tools at their disposal and the expertise, but also develop ways of working together that may be ad hoc, that may be context specific to use those different types of data, qualitative, quantitative, together to produce analysis. And then finally, another aspect that is, I think, important to focus on as part of capacity building processes is also strengthening actors' ability to make use of the analysis and also then to update it regularly, because it's one thing to carry out analysis and to produce a document that is extremely detailed and relevant, but it's another thing to actually use it to inform your interventions and programming and the actions that you're carrying out. Another point that I wanted to cover relates to strengthening the capacities of governance institutions and cooperation structures for natural resource management. So it's extremely important to ensure that those structures and institutions are able to ensure that populations have a fair access to natural resources and that ecosystems are protected and used sustainably. So capacity building for this may involve very different things, ensuring that governance institutions and cooperation structures are inclusive, that they're able to consult and involve affected communities, again, particularly marginalized and vulnerable groups. To build trust, it can be helpful for communities and authorities to cooperate as part of technical responses, for example, through the joint collection of water and resilience data. Particular attention should be paid to involving communities that move across borders, including herder communities. And again, to be able to ensure this, you may require training and strengthening your resources to consult them. It may involve strengthening coordination mechanisms between the relevant governance institutions, virtually or horizontally at the national level, but also across borders, obviously, for example, to manage transboundary rivers and water basins. We've seen that in some cases, government institutions with a mandate relating to the management of water resources may be ignored or undermined by other institutions in the same governments, for example, due to conflicting priorities, protecting water resources versus developing oil production, protecting wetlands versus expanding agricultural production or residential areas, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of capacity building, this really involves strengthening how actors may operate within their institutions and services. And then the last point would be, the penultimate point would be strengthening early warning systems, something that I touched on earlier. And then also ensuring that the national security forces of partner countries play a positive role in protecting diverse population groups' access to natural resources. So this can involve developing security forces' understanding of, let's say, water-related needs and tensions, or anything related to other natural resources, but also strengthening their capacities for civilian protection and engaging with communities. So this can be done through trainings on civilian protection, on climate conflict risks, but also on how to engage with local populations. The final aspect that I wanted to cover in this introduction was building capacities for integrated engagements, including for environmental peace building. So whether it is civil society organizations, governments, international organizations, learning to work together across the peace building and environmental protection fields can take a long time. It may involve learning to understand and to use different types of data, concepts, methods, but it can also involve adapting the sequencing, the timing of interventions. So in terms of capacity building, it can involve, in addition to what I covered earlier, strengthening actors' ability to carry out joint conflict analysis and joint planning, including in consortia, helping partners, again, thinking of consortia in particular, but to develop shared indicators, also shared monitoring and evaluation processes. Having shared indicators can help actors across sectors develop shared understandings of the outcomes being pursued and why they're being pursued in a specific manner. In consortia, it can be the case that having a specific partner that is responsible solely for monitoring and evaluation can be helpful to prevent possible tensions between organizations from different sectors. Another point relates to building the capacities of local communities and local civil society actors to respond to climate conflict risks. This can involve providing them with adequate financial and material resources, sharing data and analysis with them, building their own expertise and research capacities on the issues that we're discussing, including through trainings and interactive workshops. It's important here to highlight the role of, I would say, peer-to-peer exchanges, precisely because they are usually the ones with their expertise, local actors, local civil society groups. They have been dealing with those issues for a long time. They have developed solutions, but they may require support in expanding further their existing actions, digging deeper on some specific issues, or even sharing their knowledge with other actors and building cohesion and cooperation through those those activities. So peer-to-peer exchanges, I think, is key here. and then also developing their ability to monitor government responses to these risks, including across borders, to strengthen accountability. So perhaps another, last point to cover here relates to, and this, is linked to capacity building, but goes beyond it as well, is providing platforms to share best practices, share lessons learned, share failures as well, and strengthening partners' ability to communicate and to raise awareness about those issues. If I have to pick one example in relation to water resources, both authorities and civil society actors can play key roles in spreading awareness about equitable and sustainable water usage. They can play a role in disseminating information about the water needs of communities. For example, explaining to certain communities how other communities, other groups that live downstream, perhaps across the border, may also depend on the water in a given river. They can play a role in educating people and groups on the protection of water resources, including against pollution. And so actors looking to support capacity building should really have a key focus on awareness raising around those issues, including through partnerships between authorities and civil society actors. And so ensuring that populations are better informed on those issues can help strengthen their ability to hold authorities accountable as well. So that's really a bit of an overview and introduction, but I'll be happy to go into more detail and to cover examples during the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lorenzo. That was very insightful, and thank you to everyone for all the questions you've been placing in the Q&A. We will be sure to get to them, as well as the ones put into the chat. Next, I'd like to welcome Yumiko Yasuda from GWP to share insights to capacity building approaches from training programs in Africa on transboundary water governance and law, as well as feedback received from a global MOOC resource. Over to you, Yumiko.
Thank you very much. Do you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Great.
Oh, sorry, no, Yumiko, it's not showing up.
It's not?
No.
Okay, let me just one moment. I will try again.
Okay.
Now?
People have said they can see your screen. I can see your screen now. Thank you.
Can you see now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So let me make it to the presentation mode. Is this okay now? Again, I made it to presentation mode. Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me to join this webinar. It's a great honor. In my presentation on these approaches to capacity building for improved transboundary water governance, I'll be introducing specifically two case studies that we have been working on. One is on the Pan-Africa water governance and international water law training that we have been conducting. Another one is the massive open online course on governance for transboundary freshwater security. That's another course. So from these two experiences, then I would like to draw on to some of the reflections. So Pan-Africa water governance and international water training is a training that we have been conducting every year since 2015, except some years that we have skipped due to COVID. And this training is targeted at Pan-Africa level. So we are bringing the practitioners on transboundary water from all across the continent. So far, we have trained more than 300 participants across the African continent through the open application processes. So we conduct the open application process so anyone can apply. But of course, we have some kind of selection criteria because we want to make this training applicable and also to be applied on the ground. So most of the participants has been people who have been working directly with the river basin organizations, RBOs, the government transboundary water focal points, or perhaps the foreign ministry, regional economic commissions, representatives, and as well as some NGO, academics, and youth participants. Initially, we started this training as a pure international water law training, and then generally shifted to include some other components of the water governance, particularly the negotiation part. The training has been conducted in the partnership with a wide range of organizations, bringing their technical expertise as well as some financial resources from different partners. So the key approaches to this training is the combination of international water law, which will be it's the main subject, through other governance aspects, particularly on the negotiation. We combine the theory and the practice. So there are lectures and given on the international water law principles that is supplemented by presentation of the case studies that is coming actually mostly from the participants. So this peer-to-peer learning component, which Lorenzo also in his presentation earlier also identified as an important aspect. And this is precisely also where we also found very important and participants appreciated. And then we also have conducted a blended learning approach. So we've also asked people to take a look at some of the video lectures prior to coming to this training course from the MOOC, which is the second case that I'm going to introduce you in today's presentation. And in conducting this, we've been also utilizing the simulation exercises, which actually combines this international water law theory and the negotiation theory and the practices. So people will be then applying on the simulation cases to actually do a simulation negotiation, but utilizing the tools from international water law. In last training in 2022, we first time introduced a hybrid training model, which was a bit of experiment, I must say, because particularly on this simulation exercise where we were used to doing this on site. But we have managed to successfully conduct this on a hybrid level. So we managed to also put together simulation exercise and the group discussions online as well. And then also I must say that another effect from this training was the evolution of the community of practice across the continent. So participants kept in touch after the training. And there's been an interest to also develop an online platform to foster this community. So we recently launched this Pan-Africa Transboundary Lab, which is this online community hosted on our toolbox. In order to understand the impact from these trainings, we've conducted alumni survey in 2020. So this is like from between 2015 to 2020. The respondents are about 65% male, 35% female. It represents actually the ratio of participants. This is roughly 30-70 is the ratio that we actually receive an application. So we try to make sure the gender is balanced, but also really like reflecting on also the interest from the applicants as well. Half of those are roughly the hydrologists and engineers, so technical people from technical background, really directly working on the managing transboundary water directly. And then we also have some legal practitioners as well as other type of work, the researchers and so on, joining these trainings. And also in terms of these people's roles, they are diversifying roles in transboundary water management, from delivering on transboundary water governance at the regional level to national institutional mandates on transboundary water governance. For instance, the people from the Nile River Basin, the Mekuru project, the Mekuru River Basin project, specialists and expert services in support of the transboundary governance, so some legal advisor in the transboundary water context, and also some people directly more engaged in the capacity building or lobby advocacy and so on. So we've also had quite a few participants who are associated with the universities. So after the training, they also took back the learning and actually applied their learning into their training they conduct at their own university. So this also brings a multiple impact effect. From the survey results, we also asked about the motivation to attend these trainings. And I think the motivation has been really to fully understand the transboundary legal frameworks that are deepened knowledge of water legislation to enable drafting the negotiation of bilateral agreements, and to also network with the other practitioners in the field. This has been another motivation. And to also inform the research and capacity building of university students and communities affected by water scarcity and so on. We've also tried to understand the participants, to what extent they feel that negotiation skill has improved from this training on the scale of 1 to 4. And I was quite pleased to see that 95% of these respondents indicated that negotiation skills had improved to some degrees. And the last quarter percent, 22%, 25% are really saying great improvement. And more than half is really giving us a high score. So it seems that training really gave a great impact in terms of their skills in this. So specifically, we also asked, have you applied any of the skills that you learned in your actual work? And 90% have said yes. And what have they applied for? So some applied these skills to develop the charters, treaties, and agreements on the transboundary water, for instance, on the negotiation in the Nile Basin, Buzi-Sabi Basin, also the Volta Basin Water Charter, and so on. The participants also used the skill to really advance cooperation, particularly on the institutional setup, on the strategic planning and implementation. For instance, many also contributed to the monitoring of the SDG 6.5.1 and 6.5.2. These are the two indicators that contains the progress towards advancing transboundary water cooperation in the Sustainable Development Goals. Some have also been playing the role as a technical advisory to the Limpopo Basin Commission or in Senku River Basin Committee, and so on. Also, some really utilize the skills in their work to create a new river basin organization of Ogowe, Nutem, Como, Wolo, and Mouni River Basin, and so on. And also some applied for the monitoring of the transboundary aquifer and hydrological monitoring in different basins. And also, I would say that one of the first countries that has signed up to this Helsinki Convention, the Water Courses Convention, the UN Water Convention, was also the alumni from this training. Was really, after going home, really played a catalytic role in the country acceding to this global convention on transboundary water. Also, some have applied the skills towards the development and facilitating the development and implementation of the transboundary infrastructure in the different basins, including Obani system in the Central African Republic, to the Lake Chad and Route 63 project, and so on. So there are a variety of evidences how this type of training really made an impact on the ground through improving the capacity and really empowering these participants. We've also asked what would be their requirements for continuous learning, because the training itself is just like a week or less than a week. And how would they also, what are the needs for them afterwards? This is really important to follow up. So majority of them responded as sharing information on the trends, activities, and other issues related to international water and innovative and creative idea solutions. So like also to generate and manage the body of knowledge for people to sort of draw on an example. So again, here comes learning from others. And 77% of the respondents have said they would love to really be a part of this online community, which was the reason that we actually launched this community. Now, the second case I'm going to introduce is the massive open online course on governance for transboundary freshwater security. This course was developed by Global Water Partnership together with GEF IWLearn. It's a global project of exchanging and learning of the transboundary water managers that is has actually funded by the Global Environment Facility, with so many partners that were engaged in the production of this course, which is listed here, but I think in the next slide I have more partners logos who contributed to this. We have 6 modules in this course. starting from introduction to transboundary freshwater security, water diplomacy, negotiation skills, international water law, institutions, management tools and mechanisms, and then financing for transboundary water security. This was launched in 2019, and it really provides the key aspects of the transboundary freshwater security and the governance, and particularly applying to the transboundary waters context. We actually have the lectures and case studies from 80 different professionals around the world. Almost all of the lecture videos are from the different speakers. So this really brings a really wide range of experiences. I've seen a lot of MOOC and the online courses that are developed by just 4 or 5 key lecturers repeating the different type of topics, but we deliberately try to bring in different professionals, and this was really appreciated by our participants. The course is available in English. The original course language is English, but it's been translated into French as a whole course, and then the whole course is available in French in the CapNet, another platform. But also we have subtitles for all the lectures and videos in 5 languages, including French, Russian, Chinese, Spanish, and Portuguese. So that really gives an accessibility to these online resources. So far, we've had over 3,500 participants from 162 countries taking this course. And as part of this, also, we've conducted an online session. We've so far conducted 14 online interactive sessions. And the reason why we do this is because we've developed the MOOC, and then we also try to understand what MOOC fails. The example of the failed MOOCs, the number one was not available to have interactions. Like there's no interactivity in this type of online tool that is just sitting out there. People need active engagement. So this is why we started this series with a wide range of partners to co-host, bring in the lectures, and we made this very highly interactive. So people will be able to go into small breakout and ask directly questions to lecturers and speakers as well. So this event has been very popular from that perspective, really supplementing this MOOC and also bringing the aspects that doesn't exist in many of the online events that is out there. That is mostly one way. This is we also try to look at the impact from this to get some feedback. It's not as easy to get this type of massive open online course and get the results, but we've got some results from the people. This is the professional description of the participants categories. So almost half of the participants are the professionals in this related industry. We have quite a big chunk, like 20% of academics and research, as well as about 16% of the full-time students. So these are the really 2 key participants and the learners in our MOOC. And we also asked what are the roles that they play in transboundary water management, and there are all kinds of answers. So we just made these word clouds to demonstrate. So a lot of people, many people are saying yes, water, transboundary management, project, research, policy and research, and facilitator and advisor, so on. So these are like just gives you a snapshot of what type of audience that we are talking about here. And we also have the evaluation of the course, feedback from the course to ask these 5 questions. And almost all the questions, so we got pretty positive score. I think the blue and the orange represent the highly sort of score. Yes, they are very relevant. So the first question is, this course's modality was effective in enhancing my learning. Second was the effectiveness of the instructors. And then the third question is on the course platform, whether it's easy to navigate. Fourth question was whether they would recommend this course to other people. And the 5th question is that it was valuable to them. So all these questions, we received over 95% response positive, like either strongly agree, which is blue, or the orange, that is agree. Now, let me go to yes. Then we also asked the question whether they are interested in future interaction through online community of practice, and 85% of them said yes. So this is why we actually created this online exchange platform called Transboundary Water Knowledge Exchange Hub, which is hosted on the GWP's toolbox. And we actually have a lot of here is just the front page of that exchange hub, and you are all welcome to join. Actually, I can post the link after this. And this event, we also created the event post, where you can also post perhaps your post-event reflection if you're interested to share that. Maybe that could be a nice way to exchange on this very webinar that MEDEREC is organizing. So this is really created, this space has become like an exchange place for many transboundary water practitioners. Anyone can join and share their events, their views. So there are different tabs in terms of blogs, events, sharing materials, opportunities, and so on. So finally, I would like to go to my last slide. Yes. So reflection from these training events is that effective capacity building requires a combination of the multiple approaches. There's no like one approach that is good enough. You do need different approaches, from utilizing online, combining that with a face-to-face, and then really interaction is really, really important. People really learn when they apply. If you just listen to things, it's very difficult to comprehend. But if they're given the problems, try to solve it utilizing the skill. This is where really the learning also happens. The peer-to-peer learning is really important, as I mentioned earlier, particularly on a subject like international water law. Their principles are easy to understand. One of the key principles, for instance, of the international water law is equitable and reasonable utilization. Yes, that concept itself is, yes, everyone can agree, but how do you actually translate that principle onto the ground and implement in transboundary water management? There are so many different answers to that. And really the best way for people to learn is to really learn from each other. How did you implement this principle of equitable resource utilization in your transboundary basin? So these are the type of things and the reasons why we think that peer-to-peer learning is really important. And that is also what the feedback we heard from the people. The community of practice, really continuing this further dialogue with the peer colleagues who have shared the same experience, sharing the same ambitions and like-minded people. Everybody's, particularly, for instance, in this training on the Pan-Africa, everybody's got their own basin to take care of. They have maybe similar problems. They all want to improve. So it's very nice for them to come together, and that really creates a community of practice. And if this type of trainings is done in a context of more specific basin or several countries, the more closer regional context, that all can also create and catalyze actually the initiation of the cooperation. We have seen this in our attempt, in our work that we've been doing in the regional dialogue context in the Southern Eastern Europe, Central America, and also Southern Africa. It's not just the training that we've been doing this, but we've been also fostering some of the dialogues, which really successfully created some spin-off actual basin collaborations on the transboundary context. So I think this community of practice is really important outcome from these type of exchanges. The partnership approach is really important. No one organization has all the skills. We do need to really tap into those who really have the global skills, the best skills, and there are a lot of like-minded partners who really are willing to contribute. So take advantage of that partnership. Finally, to have this need for continuation interactions for the long-term learning. And this reflects on my point about the community of practice. People really eager to continue that interaction. So for our role is to really facilitate this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yumiko. There's a lot there to unpack and look through, and we look forward to addressing some of these questions after our next presentation, which is from Hector. And I would like to welcome Hector to discuss how through integrating components of environmental peace building into larger processes, some very tangible results towards it were seen. Over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Dane. I'm going to share my screen now. Please let me know if you can.
It is not in slideshow form, but we can see.
Slideshow. Is it now?
Yes, we just need to change it to a full screen. Great.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm really excited to be part of this webinar and to learn from all my panelists and also the audience. So my name is Hector Morales Muñoz, and I'm a senior advisor at Adelphi. And I'm going to present today two cases of capacity building in nature conservation to consolidate or to create peace. And the cases are on a post-peace agreement in south of Colombia and a climate security programming experience in Northwest Nigeria. So a little bit about us, about Adelphi. We are an independent think tank and leading policy consultancy, which facilitate transformative change in a livable future. We do scientific policy analysis, evidence-based advice, and close communication with political and societal stakeholders to shape political agendas, promote vital issues on policy spaces, and support policymakers and implementers with the strategies enable them to act efficiently and correctly. I am part of the climate diplomacy and security team, and we do foreign policy responses to the climate crisis, addressing risks, sizing opportunities. Most specifically, we try to do a more systematic look at the security policy consequences of climate change and to identify responses to this challenge. So the objectives of my presentation today are first to provide lessons learned about outputs of capacity building for biodiversity conservation efforts to peace building in Colombia, and to explain how capacity building is integrated into programming of a climate security project in Nigeria, which we recently participated on. So first, the case of Colombia. Colombia has two overlapping challenges. First, peace agreement implementation, which was signed between the state of Colombia and the rebel group, the FARC, armed force of Colombia, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. And even though the peace agreement was signed, violence is still present in the faraway regions, deep into the Amazon jungle. And also the deforestation rates staggered after the peace agreement was signed. It was not due to the peace agreement, but because of the lack of an effective implementation of some measures for the integral rural reform of the peace agreement, and also because there was a void of power after the rebels handed out the weapons. They had a de facto governance mechanism to impede the agricultural frontier to advance into the forested areas. And now you can see here on the map that the agricultural frontier has advanced into the Amazon region. So the Amazon region starts here, and here are the Andes. So in the Andes, there is an agricultural culture, and the deforestation has started to advance. So Adelphi made an analysis, a study together with WWF Colombia and Germany, and an organization of Colombia that is called Fundación Ideas para la Paz, Foundation of Ideas for Peace. So you can also check this study more in depth for context. But I'm going to focus on this area, this red circle here, which is even closer to the Andes, but has not been deforested and is located in a buffer zone of a protected natural area. So this area is called Peasant Reservoir Zone or Zona de Reserva Campesina, which is a special jurisdiction where different organizations, public institutions join together to achieve sustainable management of the territory and halt the advance of the agricultural frontier. And in this area, which is located in the buffering zone of a national park called Cordillera Los Picachos, there was a high presence of the FARC guerrilla, and it was affected by the armed conflict immensely. So it was a military area where there was not access to civilian population, and also no scientific expeditions were never conducted in this area. So as a consequence of the armed conflict, this area remained almost untouched by the economic activities or agricultural activities. And this made it very interesting from a conservation point of view. So it has an agroforestry vocation, and there was coexistence between members of the FARC and peasants. So after the peace agreement, camp for reintegration of the peasants was located in this area, in this settled an interesting governance mechanism. So I was part of a biological expedition as part of my doctoral research on environmental peace building that was supported by WWF Germany and Colombia. And this biological expedition was an expedition that allowed a biological characterization of 2 routes, making an inventory of natural species and biodiversity that existed there. And this is a very interesting case because the expedition was confirmed by former combatants, by scientists, which were very eager to look into this area because they were never able to access this area. So there were Colombian biologists, experts in mammals, in different animal species, and they made groups together with peasants, former combatants, and even park rangers, so official authorities. So this started process of capacity building where different conflicting parties, such as the state and even the peasants and the former rebels, joined forces into this expedition. Here in the pictures, you can see some biologists analyzing vegetation encountered in the expedition, and also the installation of cameras to see the species that were present in the region. So the trainings that were conducted were on deforestation driver analysis, on biodiversity monitoring, on management of monitoring equipment, on species characterization and management, for example, snakes and lion puma. Also, some trainings were done on advocacy in national decision-making scenarios and income generation activities. So this approach of inclusive conservation, such as ecotourism and honey production, and on conservation agreements and territorial planning. So what this capacity building enables is community participatory monitoring, which creates social cohesion, since the spaces to share and create knowledge contribute to a sense of belonging to a community of practice. And this also elevates their voice to do advocacy at national governance decision-making spaces. And also this working together at a technical level increases trust and cooperation. These are these hypotheses within the environmental peace building theory. So some indicators where you can measure as a result of these capacity building trainings is how the intra-community perceived trust increases after such an expedition, or how trust between communities and the states can create cooperation in specific processes where communities and the states are cooperating. In this case, they started cooperating on a situation analysis for deforestation drivers. So some of the outcomes that we saw after the expedition was, or that they reported, was income generation, some organizational development through experiences as service providers for tourism, community learning, so knowledge exchange between park rangers, scientists, former combatants. For example, the former combatants knew the routes and they have seen the animals present there, and but the scientists brought the more scientific knowledge and how these species were important for the ecosystem and how they should be conserved. And for example, a former combatant said that the biological expedition was extraordinary, so because they learned to appreciate all the richness of the territory. But however, they are worried regarding resource exploitation and interest by external actors. They don't want to see that, for example, a monopolistic approach of large hotel chains is going to be deployed in this area, which is really interesting for bird watching, etc. And others were saying that ecotourism in this region is compatible with nature conservation because they operate under this governance mechanism, the Peasants Reservoir Zone, and they make visible the importance of taking care of water resources. So they also, for example, do farther away from the protected area, they do rafting, where former combatants are guides into rafting, and they say that the river has become an artery of reconciliation and environmental education. And before it used to be a border between military and guerrillas. And now it has been navigated by multiple actors, and reforestation around the river has been conducted. Yeah, so this is the first case, and we also with Adelphi, this already on my role as a senior advisor, we conducted a programming exercise in the northwest of Nigeria. So we met with different actors from civil society, government, journalists, academia, in the regions of Sokoto, Zamfara, and Katsina in the northwest of Nigeria, where the conflict between herders and farmers has escalated. And we see that there are some climate security risks. So we used to do the analysis to start the programming, a methodology that is developed by Adelphi that is called Weathering Risks, where we first map the impacts of climate change and also put a conflict lens on the influence of climate change. Also, we analyze the vulnerability and resilience in the context, and then identify different scenarios and analyze the data together with the actors to identify entry points and different options. So in this case, what we saw is that the increase in temperatures and unpredictable rainfall variability and the droughts and floods happening in the region have created a loss of critical ecosystems and infrastructure, and also a scarcity in grazing pastures. So this has also reduced arable land and altered transhuman patterns, and together with food price increase and food insecurity and armed flows from transnational borders, had created many conflict risks and grievances over lack of food and access to natural resources such as land. The tensions between farmers and herders had escalated over resource access and had created a vicious circles of banditry where marginalized herders are evolving from cattle rustling into kidnapping, extortions, violent attacks to communities, and also has created a vicious cycle of violence. So all of this in a context where there is a huge population growth, religious and ethnic radicalization, high dependence on agricultural livelihoods, and lack of women's participation, youth unemployment. So what we extracted from based on the graphs expressed by the stakeholders in this region was an approach where 3 components were made. So first, to create a resilience information system where community-based data collection of climatic and conflict risk is created. And these numbers that you see here is where capacity building should be conducted. So on integrating, as Lorenz mentioned, analysis to climate and conflict risk together. So this can create a community of practice, and also to scale up this information and connect it to national information systems for disaster risk reduction, early warning, and data communication between government agencies and the producers and the herders present in the area. Also doing some conflict-sensitive climate adaptation, so measures such as nature-based solutions, solar power pumps for climate-smart agriculture, and also integrate all of this data into natural resource management committees, creating safe spaces for women and community leaders empowerment, and creating innovative livelihoods and the possibility to create jobs for the youth. So this is a process that is still going on. So the inception phase of this project is starting. This project is being implemented by UNDP Nigeria, and UNDP Nigeria called us to help them do this programming. So as conclusions, I want to highlight some recommendations that are very practical. So for example, environmental peacebuilding mechanisms need that the capacity building emphasizes the process of creating community dialogue, more than specific contents around environment measures, which are very important and needed, but the peacebuilding part is a process of creating community dialogue, enhancing negotiation skills, and as Dr. Jumik said, it is very important to continue the dialogue of capacity building. Also, training usually is the first point of encounter for conflicting parties, and this eases tensions to advance into more political and controversial issues. And this training should open the voices to marginalized communities and vulnerable communities. Also, it's important to combine environmental technical knowledge with advocacy models and negotiation skills. Also, these very practical training modules should align with communities' work schedules and priorities. Usually, farmer communities are very busy. They cannot give space to just stop their productive activities and take capacity building. So it's very important to align the work schedules, and learning by doing is very important. So communities appropriate better the learning processes when those are part of their daily lives, and increase multi-level training, integrate and adapt training modules between communities on the ground and high-level officials. So for example, in the case of Colombia, the trust was increased at the local level, but the farmers and the farming competence were still reluctant to some policies at the national level, where there was less of an approach to dialogue to enable conservation with productive activities within the protected areas, for example. Yeah, so this is, I leave it there, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hector. That was incredibly insightful, and we've got a lot of pending questions. Thank you to all the speakers for sharing their remarkable insights. We welcome a question and answer discussion session with the audience. We've already had a couple of questions presented to us, some thoughts that I would like to open up to the audience. If you have questions you'd like to ask right away, please just raise your hand, use the raise your hand function on the webinar. and we can proceed to responding to them. Some that are already in the list include questions around accountability, and it's actually being shared on the chat from Katarina Schmidt. How can we use different capacity building design and developments to ensure the behavior of government and or security actors? I think this was very much also linked to Lorenzo's presentation. So I don't know, Lorenzo, if you would like to be the first to address some of those.
Sure, thanks a lot, and thanks again for the questions. So perhaps on the language that I was using about ensuring the behavior of government actors and particularly security forces, protects people's access to natural resources, etc. So yeah, I was using ensure in relation to how the European Union should engage with partner governments. As I mentioned, as EPLO, we have a mandate to influence the European Union specifically, and so this was directed at the EU, and this can take different forms, including in relation to building the capacities of civil society actors. So in the EU's political dialogue with partner governments, this should be a key aspect of their focus on protecting civilians, ensuring that they have access to the natural resources that they need as part of their livelihood activities. In terms of how the EU supports security forces, particularly through trainings, I think it's extremely important to include components that relate to the protection of human rights, to ensuring that security forces understand the needs of affected populations, particularly the most vulnerable and marginalized groups within populations, and also that security forces are trained to engage with local populations and civil society actors so that they can engage in the types of joint activities, platforms for dialogues, etc., that were referenced by Hector as well, for example. There is also a component relating to indeed building oversight and accountability mechanisms, including to gather grievances, possible grievances from civil society and local populations. And then in line with what you were saying, Katarina, building the capacities of civil society actors themselves to monitor the actions of governments and particularly security forces. But also their capacities to defend their rights and also to carry out advocacy work in relation to the issues affecting them and the behavior of security forces and governments. And then perhaps to cover the other question that that was raised in the chat following my presentation by Patricia on what is conflict analysis, and if I could give some examples of gender dynamics. So conflict analysis refers to the process through which one is able to identify and understand a given context, particularly in relation to the peace and conflict dynamics within it. So it's sometimes called conflict and peace analysis, context analysis. The terminology can vary, but it involves paying particular attention to the formal and informal institutions in place within the area, including those that relate to natural resource management, and including institutions and structures that can be transboundary. It involves looking at the key actors and the population groups within the area, their relations, the distribution of power between them as well. It relates to looking at the political, economic, environmental, and social factors that may cause, that may sustain, and that may drive conflict. And it also relates to looking at the possible drivers and opportunities that may exist for peace. And so as part of such analysis, it's really important to pay particular attention to gender and to dynamics of inclusion and exclusion. And so this means examining, for example, the diverse roles that different men and women play in conflict dynamics, the different ways in which they may experience conflict and the effects of climate change. This involves taking care to understand that neither men nor women are homogeneous groups. For example, poor rural women may have different experiences, needs, and expectations than urban, educated women, for example. How gender norms are structured, gendered marginalization can interact with other dynamics to drive or to prevent conflict. For example, it may be expected, socially expected of young men that they provide financially for their families. And as a result, if their livelihoods collapse due to an extreme weather event, some of them may be driven or pushed to join armed groups that may offer high sources of income. It may also be relevant to look at how the interplay between climate change and conflict contributes to shaping gender norms. For example, if most men leave a village to take part in a conflict fueled by the effects of climate change, the women who remain in the village may start managing its natural resources and other issues, and they may gain long-lasting legitimacy in endorsing such responsibilities. So, those are only a few examples, but there can be very different ways through which climate change, peace and conflict, gender equality, and inequalities and dynamics of exclusion and inclusion interact. So it's something that's extremely important to look at through analysis to ensure that engagements are sensitive to those dynamics and do not inadvertently contribute to harming vulnerable populations.
Thank you so much, Lorenzo. Would any of the other panelists like to speak to the question? Okay, so we've had a couple of other thoughts come up. Would any of just on that same question in terms of how to add accountability to processes, would any of the other audience members like to add to it or ask a follow-up question on that? Okay, so the concept of language and how we frame these things has come up in a couple of the questions. And so perhaps a question that we could ask is, what role does framing the problem that capacity building approaches are meant to help address can present either pathways to effective development of those capacity building initiatives, or perhaps act as a form of greenwashing those spaces? Does anyone have a response they would like to give to something like that about how we need to frame capacity building initiatives so that they create a positive peace building space and not add to negative peace processes? Hector, perhaps you'd be good to start off.
Yeah, right. And I think also connected, the narratives connected to the accountability is really important to keep humble in the way that no one knows the context best as someone that is living in the context. So if you come as an outsider, even within their own country, people that live in the capitals, that go to remote regions, even nationals, they are all the time trying to explain how things should work in a local context. So all of this capacity building should be more like an exchange of knowledge. For example, as in the case that I presented, the scientists, even though they were like Western educated people outside of the country in Colombia, recognized biologists, etc., they were very humble to learn from the peasants and the former combatants that were there. So it was an exchange of knowledge more than just doing capacity building. So this is really important to acknowledge and to also build together and co-design solutions. And there's a need for translation between existing knowledge and for example, observations of climate change and other models or methodologies that you can develop in normal academia. So I can also think of the lack of knowledge that exists in about the patterns of transhumans and the nomadic experience of pastoralists. It's really difficult to reach out to them, and sometimes they also perceive climate change in a different way. They explain in the narrative of changes in the climate in a different way, and at the end you arrive to the same conclusions. So it's a matter of translating into co-creating knowledge, I would say.
Thank you, Hector. Does any of the other panel speakers have something to add to that?
Maybe I can just say something. So I think the case I presented is more purely on capacity building and more like collecting participants sort of approach, not rather than specific region or specific area and its peace building and so on. But we've also had, as I mentioned, done some of the regional dialogues that bring in different multi-stakeholders from the particular geographic area, trying to really create the enabling environment that will foster the cooperation. And I think the capacity building can be an effective sort of tool that can consist part of this dialogue. So dialogue can take place in different formats, more from the convening the roundtable to actually site visit, capacity building, and doing some joint activities and so on. So it's really, it can take in the different forms. So I would say that it really depends on the context setting and what's useful in that context. And I also found an example from Hector very interesting approach, and also this kind of joint activities, like bringing the people who were not agreeing before, but like to conduct the joint research and monitoring. And this is very useful, I would say, in the context of the transboundary water cooperation. We always talk about the data exchange as a first step in the collaboration, but actually it's not that straightforward. Like, because sometimes when it's a very contentious environment, whose data actually counts, whose data is valid, is like a big question. There's a mistrust. When there's a mistrust, and if the parties don't really agree to the other side's data coming in, it's really like data exchange doesn't really much to actually building the cooperation and peace. In that case, the joint monitoring, a joint research, even like utilizing and through researchers from the different parts of the countries who are relatively more neutral, but could be trusted by governments, for instance. This can be like one mechanism to really create more collaboration and mutual understanding, for instance. Yeah, so maybe I stop here.
Thank you, Yumiko. Any other panel speakers who would like to contribute to that? Kieran.
Hello, thank you. I suppose in terms of the language and the approach, there's two things. I mean, we use in MEDREC the approach of the Irish peace process. So all of the people we deal with, so the countries we engage with, the countries where we do our capacity buildings, are owners of the organization. They're all part of the organization. So co-design is part of everything from the top in terms of governance of the organization down to on the ground. All states that are members agree to three things: to be joint owners, joint guarantors, and co-equal partners of the process and in everything we do. So that's down to language and linguistics and the whole language around equality, co-equal partnership, right down to co-design. And everything we do is then passed up twice a year to an executive council of all the countries to look at it. So the whole thing is jointly owned. So in terms of narrative and actual design, that thing is very important and central to everything we do.
Thank you, Kieran. Does anyone else have questions from the audience? We've had a couple of questions regarding legal frameworks and perhaps how legal frameworks could, in some sense, be activated sooner in these contexts, because quite often they're developed in the aftermath of situations unfolding and then refined. Are there any thoughts in terms of how legal frameworks and laws could be leaned into and used to support capacity building initiatives to allow for that trickle down or trickle up effect between national, international, and regional efforts? Any panelists who would like to respond?
Yes, so I think legal frameworks for negotiating transboundary water is super important, but also interstate. What happened in Colombia was that some protected areas were done legally from Bogota without acknowledging farmers already living in these areas that were supposed to be untouched. So the problem right now is a conflict that is not violent, sometimes escalates to violence, but is farmers living in protected areas that are being pushed out due to this new legislation. And one case where capacity building can work is that if they know the governance structures better, they can negotiate on more equal terms with the legislator at the national level. And another thing also, making echo of what Yumiko said about the importance of data and the legitimacy of different kinds of data, is in socio-environmental conflicts around the impacts of mining or mining operations, for example, in water. One approach is developing technical data, localized data in a community participatory manner, helps them to make complaints against big mining operations, and to have proof that, for example, water sources are being contaminated by a mining operation, for example. So having into account the global tendency to increase mining production of critical minerals for energy transition, this is something that should be also in place, where communities that can be affected in an increased production of minerals can also have a legal background and technical information to back up legal claims for possible environmental disruptions.
Thank you, Hector. Any other panelists who would like to contribute to legal frameworks and their role in capacity building approaches, or capacity building approaches informing legal frameworks? I think we have time for one last question. If there's a question coming from the audience, either in the chat or in the Q&A.
If I may quickly come in on the question, Danae, very, very quickly, I just wanted to echo what Hector was just saying in terms of the relevance of building the capacities of civil society actors to engage, to feed into the drafting of legal frameworks early on. This is why I also emphasize the importance of inclusive governance structures that allow for the participation of diverse population groups into decision-making processes, into the drafting of legal frameworks. It's also key, obviously, as I mentioned, to strengthen the capacities of groups to monitor how legal frameworks are being implemented, because it's one thing to have policies and legal frameworks on paper, but it's another thing entirely to see how they're being implemented in practice. It's also, when we mention legal frameworks, I think something that I didn't touch on in my presentation, it's also important to strengthen the capacities of civil society actors and also of governance institutions to monitor the actions of private actors and ensure their accountability when it comes to respecting legal obligations and monitoring activities that may have harmful effects on the environment, and so sometimes also on conflict. So just a point I wanted to add as well.
Thank you, and a really good one too. I think something that has stuck out as well is that need for consistent monitoring and evaluation of how these initiatives are feeding back into the spaces that they're meant to be supporting and the processes that they're meant to be supporting, and the challenges around that. So we last looked at monitoring and evaluation in peace building processes, and we will continue to also unpack that in the future and open up conversations around that so that we can all learn from each other a lot more. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It's been a good hour and a half of your time. We are grateful that you're here with us. To all the panel speakers, thank you for your insights. I'm sure people will go away with much to think of today. We will be sharing the webinar's recording on our platforms, including our website, LinkedIn pages, and Twitter. And we will be sharing a webinar summary in due course with everybody for safekeeping. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks for the discussion.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to join. Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.